Tell me, like, are there certain things that you'd like to talk about in particular?
Um, I think there were three words that I sent you in the email, and we can kind of focus on those themes, which is storytelling, perseverance, and Black agency.
Hmm.
I have some notes right here, but Agency, I've defined it in my work as the psychological liberation through acts of rebellion and surrender as it relates to Black people in North America.
Great.
Um, and so how it comes up in my work, through metaphors and conversations. I have a very um, my my practice is very dialogue heavy.
Hmm.
So if we can kind of focus on there, but I'm quite open. I just told myself I'll talk about the artwork and then my current process for making and how my methods have kind of changed after grad school and how grad school was kind of a catalyst for that change.
Hmm.
Um, yeah.
Okay, great. I feel like the title of the exhibition and sort of the concept is something that is really loaded for, in every way. And so I'd like to kind of ask you about that too, and how you feel about what the title of the exhibition means to you. And how long have you known Charles? How did you guys get in touch with each other?
Um, I can't even remember the initial meet, but I think we were circulating in the same mutual group on Instagram.
Hmm.
Um, and then I shared I was working freeze with Proyectas Otro Violeta, which is a Guatemalan gallery. And he's
Uh-huh.
like, "Oh, I'll be there." And I said, "Okay." And I seen him at Freeze and we chatted a bit. Um, I feel like I emailed him my after that, my portfolio.
Yeah.
And then he said, "Yeah, I'm working on a show. I really want you to be in it." And I said, "Okay." And then some time had passed, and he said, "Okay." He's like, "What do you have?" So I
Hmm.
shared some work, and then I made it happen.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, which was it was quite. I really appreciated that because my work has shifted, or I guess my language has been strengthening with time.
Hmm.
And how I approach it and his fascination or curiosity with my work, I really appreciated.
Yeah. Yeah, he's a great guy. I really, really enjoy working with him. He's just really excellent.
Okay.
Let's just get started,
Yeah.
and I can ask you some questions that I want to know. And the first question that I'd like to know the answer to is how you came up with the the piece that I consider to be the defining piece of the whole show, which is the rear view mirror with the, yeah. I mean, what was your concept in coming up with that?
So that piece is entitled A Pair of Pearls. And I just started. So I think a lot of my works originally were very broad. And I think I kept my works a bit broad because there's a lot of scrutiny in the academic space. And I
Mhm.
don't think that I felt emotionally or spiritually safe to really indulge in my personal stories that I had. So I kept them broad.
Yeah.
And so now that I'm in a home space, I've been meditating with different stories that I'd like to tell that are unrelated to me. So growing up, my mom used to say, "A lady always has a pair of pearls." And when I was younger, that really used to bother me because I'm like, I don't want to wear pearls. I don't want to look like a granny right now.
Yeah.
Um, and then I started thinking about quite literally ornaments that people would hang from their rearview mirrors. And
Mhm.
then just metaphorically, what a rearview mirror just means to me as I mature into a more mature lady. Like this year, I turned 31. And so I continue to reflect on things and things that my mom used to say that I am implementing in my daily life. It's not that she knew everything, but she knew what she was supposed to share with me.
Yeah.
And then the Black Air Forces continuously show up. So typically I'm using adult Black Air Forces, but in this instance, I thought, oh, I can use the baby Air Forces. So essentially all of them together combined our story.
Yeah.
The Black Air Forces are always going to be a metaphor for agency, personal agency, my agency, on a broader spectrum, Black agency, and how my mom was essentially a vessel for that agency. So I just, it's a wisdomic piece, I guess you can say, a piece or a piece on reverence, and remembering,
Mhm.
and also just like giving ode to her.
Yeah. Is she still alive?
She's not. She passed away in 2016.
Oh, I'm sorry. Um, wow, that's amazing. Yeah, for me, that is really the sort of defining piece of the show. I love it so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And your work, what I really love about your work is that it gets right to the core of what it is that you're trying to explain, express.
Hmm.
So, for instance, when, with the piece that has the joint, and the book in it, like, can you talk a little bit about that piece and sort of how, so your work is so object oriented, right? The material has a memory, but it also has, they're clean and crisp and and beautiful and soft. If it's the baby shoes are so soft,
Yeah.
and so the materiality of your work has such a, just every sort of element has a distinct meaning, but taken together, that you're able to use them as your own visual language in a really concise way. And I guess that's what I want to ask about is like, how did you develop such a concise visual language that is simultaneously hardcore and soft and beautiful?
I That's so interesting. I haven't heard anyone describe my work ever as soft, so I'm embracing that right now. The objects, they're not new. It's just that my background is in painting, and I was so headstrong on being a painter and painting out everything. But I had a professor ask me, he said, "Why does everything have to be a painting?" But in my brain, I was like, well, I'm a painter. Of course, it has to be a painting. But while studying in the contemporary art practice program at the Royal College of Art, I was inspired to lean into the things because honestly, I could I could paint this pen and stress about it and think about it, or I could just use the pen. And
Yeah,
so instead of fighting against that, and having, it was like spiritual warfare, like on the canvas sometimes, because I'm trying to make something exactly like this when this already exists. So
right.
what I started doing was collecting the things and putting them together. And for me, I just really lean into my personal story, which has been a little bit difficult to do, as I mentioned earlier, because some of the stories are a bit vulnerable. And it's like, there could be some guilt or shame around it. Like, for example, the food stamps. When I was younger, I remember my mom using the food stamp booklet. We had those booklets, and the bills came in different colors. Um, and what she would do, she would buy little things like, one of her favorite store candies were almond joys. She liked cactus coolers or like sobe drinks, and she'd trade it to get the cash back, but she'd do it quite quickly. At the time, I didn't fully understand that that's what she was doing to get cash back, because spending with cash was less embarrassing than spending with food coupons. And so when I got older, I just thought, like, that's not embarrassing. That is the reality that we were living.
Right.
She was newly divorced. She had two daughters to raise. She's a single parent, and she has to use the resources around her in order to maintain a relatively strong foundation until she can figure out what she can do next. And
Right.
so for me, I'm less interested in like the nuance of the thing. I'd rather just use the thing. And
Yeah.
it's a little intimidating sometimes because I'm not too sure how other people will receive it, if at all. But then I always have to remind myself it really doesn't matter if other people receive it because this is my story to tell. And
Right.
it's very honest and true to me. And so I also started meditating with um, the autobiography of Malcolm X, the food coupon, and then the weed. And then it's entitled Shoot Me Open, which I was referencing to, if it's emergency, break this open. And the autobiography is like Bible to me.
Mhm.
And basic instructions before leaving Earth, which is an acronym I learned growing up in church. But that book changed my life because it was an example. It was the first example I had of someone who, to my knowledge, shared an honest story about their mishaps, but then also how they evolved as a human being, and was not running away from themselves or what people would consider to be their shadow selves, but just fully embracing the spectrum of being a human, not like, oh, I am this perfect being, I can do no wrong. And so that book, in relationship to the food coupon and then the joint when I started smoking, all of these things, it's quite literally like, shoot, if there's an emergency, shoot me open. If you need some food, use this coupon. If you've had a day or maybe you just need a break, smoke the weed. If
Yeah.
you need to be inspired and reminded that you're a human being and that it's okay to be human, read the autobiography of Malcolm X. Um, yeah, so that's how that piece kind of came about, succinct in that way.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And I love hearing you tell these stories. So tell me a little bit about, well, let's start now that, we need to kind of catch some people up that are on the call. Why don't we start with Hood Ornament and the idea of being in the show that Charles Moore had titled Hood Ornament. When he first presented the concept to you, what did you think about the title? What came to mind when he presented this exhibition premise to you?
I mean, I think conceptually I thought, oh, this is perfect because right now I'm in my what I would call my thing bag. So putting things together. I I think for a long time I didn't necessarily relate to the hood, but it's not because I wasn't in the hood. It's because my mom created such an oasis in our home space that it didn't feel like that when we were inside of our home sometimes. There's some other pieces that I'm working on. I won't detail them now, but it at the time, like the way she would put lace on the windows. She would thrift furniture and then have them reupholstered. She would buy china and then, have them shined, or she was an avid art collector. Um, but also at the same time, even though those things were true, like initially our apartment was infested with roaches, and not because we were nasty, but the building was old and like where we were, and dealing with landlords who are negligent.
Right.
um you know I remember looking outside the window and like seeing people, drugs being sold or graffiti everywhere. And it at the time, I mean, I didn't ever feel scared because like this was the environment that I was in and I embraced it. The sun was shining. I'm from mid-city LA. The palm trees are up. I'm 20 to 25 minutes away from downtown, the beach, West LA, Hollywood. I'm in between everything. And then my mom took an extra step by driving us even further out of like our area. So hood ornament, I mean, conceptually, I thought it was perfect because it really made me sit down and think even further about certain things that I may overlook.
Yeah.
Um, just, yeah, just certain things I would overlook. I didn't realize I was a latchkey kid. I had to look that up. Um, uh, I didn't I didn't really realize how parentified I was. I'm the eldest daughter, so it's just two of us. I didn't realize that I was assigned roles as an eldest daughter that put me in the position to be a parent. Um, yeah, I mean, I thought it was something that I could definitely engage in through a serious lens, but also through a comedic lens if I wanted to, which is why Waves and Fades is in there. That I mean, they're all for me, but that's for me.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah,
Talk
I thought it
about
was,
waves and fades. Tell us about waves and fades a little bit.
well, Waves and Fades is a joke. It's also something funny. I spend a lot of my time making, if I don't have the thing in front of me right now, what I do is I make digital iterations on my phone. So essentially, I'll like Photoshop items together that I think could work or like tell some type of story. So Waves and Fades, I was listening to Nuck If You Buck by Crime Mob, and I thought, oh, this is just so funny. But I don't know how it came into relationship with the Murrays because I started thinking, oh no, I know, I remember. I started thinking about people fighting, and then I started thinking about Murray's pomade and how people use Murray's pomade for waves. Growing up, I used it for edges, and my mom did too. And then I did some research, and there's a running joke, Murray's will last forever. And I have a running joke, like I want my relationship to last like a can of Murray's because you only need one can in your lifetime.
Uh-huh.
But it's in a tin can because you're actually supposed to heat it up. It's supposed
Oh,
to, yeah, it's actually a wax. So I didn't know that. So it's in a tin can. You're supposed to warm it up and then place the pomade on your hair. Um, yeah, it's a joke. Waves and fades. The Black Air Forces are commonly referred to or if they're supposed to be menacing or an example of like thievery, dark energy. But I also have some discrepancies with Blackness also always being equated to danger.
yeah.
So even though I play with the idea of danger and acts of rebellion, I also play with stepping outside of it. So to be honest, the Black Air Force is just a Black Air Force shoe. There's nothing that has been assigned to it. And so socially and culturally, people assign things to it.
Right.
So just kind of playing with those projections as well as kind of stepping outside of them. But Waves and Fades, it's just a reference to Nuck If You Buck because I was listening to it at the time and I put those things together and I thought, oh, that's kind of funny.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Okay. So you've hit on something that is really a very profound thing that I'd like to explore a little bit. The concept of um, associations with the color black.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're the perfect person to be able to articulate, to be able to expand upon what you were saying just a few minutes ago, the idea of the shoes being black, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of blackness, the all of the projections that and perceptions that and social memes that get attached to certain objects and colors, right? So, one of the things that you say about your work is that you like to really challenge the way people take in information and the way they perceive the information that is conveyed, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that that is a brilliant way of describing one of the fundamental problems of subliminal bias or
Yeah.
subconscious bias, right? Which is that people sometimes don't even realize how they perceive or why they perceive, right? a certain thing in a certain way. They don't even question it. That's kind of the ultimate problem.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, people who are brought up, say, in the American South, in Georgia or Alabama or North Carolina, somewhere like that, um, people may have certain baggage based on, ages old associations with certain objects or colors or words or, something that is completely different from someone who was brought up in the Western United States, right? So, can you talk a little bit from your own well of deep wisdom and thinking about the symbolism that is inherent in the black object of the shoe being black? If you can, and the black background on the piece with the Malcolm X autobiography, right? Like, if you think about how you are presenting the color black, what how do you hope that um, that that you can convey the essence of the color black to help the perception that's coming from the other half of the art equation perceive blackness in the way that you'd like for them to?
Hmm. There's a couple things happening. There's one where I don't care if people understand, uh, more of like a, if you know, you know. And then on the other hand, I have a strong desire to create works that provoke not only dialogue, but the practice of cultural humility, even if you don't even know that that's what you're practicing in the moment. Um, because oftentimes I like to talk, but sometimes I don't like to talk. But if we're in front of my artwork, I'd rather just yap about it. And I am consistently looking for ways to provoke people to like engage, if not even with me, with someone right next to them, or just with themselves in their inner
Right.
thinking. And if I can get people to have some level of curiosity, or even like skepticism, then I feel like the work is working. Maybe not complete, but it's working towards something. Um, because even in a pair of pearls, the baby black Air Forces are doing something completely different from Waves and Fades. It's a size 12 men's black Air Force entitled Waves and Fades, which is alluding to basically a brawl, of fighting, an agent for violence. A pair of pearls, the black Air Forces are essentially an agent for wisdom, an agent for remembering, an agent for um, listening, reflecting back. And I, mm, I don't know sometimes if I'm even trying to change a perception of Blackness more than I'm just surrendering to it. Like I mentioned earlier, like I've defined Black agency as the psychological liberation through acts of rebellion and surrender. So it's
Mhm.
essentially me just kind of like not only critiquing it, but also embracing all that it is, even whether I agree with it or not, like it exists.
Mhm.
Um, I'm also thinking about like slowly things that have been projected onto me doesn't mean that I'm not those things. Um, so it's also kind of like embracing that. One story that I'd like to mention a lot or often is a story of Frank Embry. I'm paraphrasing. Do not quote me. Nobody quote me. But I'm paraphrasing this story. Um, there was a black man down south who was enslaved, and um, they accused him of sexually assaulting a white woman, and he didn't do it. But
Yeah.
before he could he was set to trial, but before he could go to trial, they lynched him, they
Right.
whipped him, they mutilated him, they photographed him, and they entitled it the Negro Ravisher. So it made me think, if this is just a projection and this didn't even happen, and a Negro Ravisher doesn't even exist, what if it did? So for me in my practice, I'm always negotiating those things, because not only is it terrifying, but it's even more terrifying that it doesn't exist and there's still repercussions.
Yeah.
So I'm often thinking about Toni Morrison and her ability to imagine worlds outside that don't necessarily exist, but they're kind of riffs off of real life happenings. If there's already repercussions for the thing not existing, what happens if I make it exist? So the Black Air Forces right now are metaphors for that, but also metaphors for the softness that has the capacity to exist, which is why I have a pair of pearls and like those types of sentimental stories that I can share. But then there's other stories that are a little bit more dark and have lots of history loaded onto them. And so I'm constantly negotiating between those things. I'm hopping in and outside of those projections, which can be quite terrifying, not only for other people, mostly. It's not necessarily terrifying for me because it's allowing me to explore agency, Black agency.
Yeah.
Um, I think about what I would call, or other people would call as well, like Black telepathy. When things are happening in the room that are questionable or you're uncertain, or I can walk into a room with 150 people that don't look like me, but if there's one, I'm going to find eye contact. I don't know how this happens. If something happens for some reason across the room, boom, I've got the eye contact, and we have an unspoken language. And I genuinely think that has developed because of those who were enslaved, Black slaves, um, not being able to have power over your body. So how do
Mm.
you communicate with other people without doing too much? So someone, doesn't clock you for
Yeah.
rebelling just with your mind alone. Um, yeah, so those are things that I'm consistently meditating with.
And where is your practice going next? What do you have in the works, upcoming?
I'm gonna continue to make more things. I'm not in a proper studio space right now, so I haven't been painting, but I've been doing a lot of writing, a lot of doodling, and a lot of those digital iterations before I create the three-dimensional thing.
Right.
Lots of conversations, but I am quite obsessed with making the things because it it energizes me to investigate what's around me. Like, what's around me. I have to sit down and also think about where I was and how those things um, affected or impacted how I approach the world, my patience with others, or being in unique spaces. Um, I lived in London. We had the only furniture me and my roommate had was a bed. And so thinking like, how have I become not necessarily comfortable, but having patience to prioritize mm, my purpose more than like the physical things around me. How have I managed to do that? And just thinking how long I've had to do that for and how that informs my practice. I spent all of undergrad using the same paintings that were donated to me from my sister friend Lenice. So it's just kind of thinking about those things, and my practice is moving toward making more things and bigger things, and seeing what other stories I can tell that are personal as well as those that are observed.
Yeah. I want to open it up to other people to ask some questions as well. But before I do that, I want to make sure that you've been able to express everything that's important to you to express in this talk.
I think so. I mean, I could always go on, but for the three works that I'm showing, then the themes of storytelling, persevering, and Black agency. I feel like we touched on a bit, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Um, would anybody like to ask any questions? Anybody in the what would you say, audience, I guess?
Yeah. Don't be shy. Don't bite. I could continue yapping.
Hey, this is Michael. What was the reference to? Did I hear Air Force? I don't get that.
Yeah, so the Black Air Force Ones, I'm not sure if you're familiar with what they look like. Just do a quick Google, but they're black shoes. And then there's also white Air Force Ones. And so typically when people are wearing Air Force Ones or when there's references to them, it's usually of and related to people who are like stealing, they're being menacing, just uh like on their bad and most worst behavior. And so the way that I use them is metaphorically, um, using them with those projections, but also using them without. Like a shoe is just a shoe, similar to that of just like a Black person. I just so happen to be Black. I'm a Black person, but then there's so many projections that are made and placed onto me. So sometimes I embody those projections and sometimes I do not. But ultimately, the perception that somebody else has of me has more to do with them than it does with me. I'm too complex for any one person's perception.
I hear you. Is that specific to Black culture? I've never heard about anything sideways with Air Force Ones in any way.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a social cultural thing. I honestly can't even tell you when, maybe I should, that's homework for me, when those projections started. There's not anything inherently wrong with Black Air Force Ones. And that's essentially the dialogue that I'm having. Um, but socially and culturally, like you might see it and think that of somebody, especially if somebody is actually on that type of time. But it's not inherent, like it's just a shoe.
Clarence is saying that black Air Force shoes mean you want to fight.
Yeah,
You
waves
like
and
to fight.
fades. That's where waves and fades comes in.
That's so funny. That is a cultural like clue that is lost on me too. Wow, it's amazing. I mean, that's one of the incredible things about being able to look at someone someone's artwork. I've mentioned this to Clarence. Oh, Clarence says, as opposed to the white ones, which are more a representation of vanity. Interesting.
I haven't heard that.
um,
I heard that.
Clarence knows his shoes. Like
Okay.
Clarence knows what he's talking about the shoes. But it's interesting for me when I pretty boys wear white Air Forces. When I first looked, whenever I look at an artist who is outside of my um, white female bodily perspective, right? Um, I love to look at artwork and appreciate it on an aesthetic level,
Mm,
as well as for like the structure, the form, or the composition, the skill, the visual pleasure, in addition to um, what I can learn from it, right?
mhm,
And um, work such as yours, and also such as Clarence's, I can appreciate on those visual aesthetic levels, as well as my own minute, tiny little ability to see a tiny little bit into your world,
mhm,
much as I can, as much as I stretch without talking with you, as much as I stretch to sort of allow its essence to seep into my soul, I can enjoy that and feel like I've learned, right? A little
Yeah.
some. But in speaking with you about your work, what I learn is like, what I learn is that I've only picked up one tiny grain of sand of your lived experience. I've only entered your world, one tiny little grain of sand based on what I'm capable of understanding from my outside perspective, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that is very important to say and to help people realize, because it underscores the more immense importance of art and of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the art world. Because when I pick up that tiny little grain of sand by looking at your work, by having the fortune of seeing your work in a museum or a gallery, right? I pick up a tiny little grain of sand of your world. I might then get to hear you speak like we are today, or read something about your work, like in the Albuquerque Journal, and learn a little bit more from the tiny little piece of grain of sand that somebody else picked up. But um, hearing you speak about it is so drastically important, because when I hear you speak about your work, or Clarence speak about his work, um, Aristotle speak about his work, I'm able to gain like football fields more worth of an understanding of your lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, this whole discussion that we're having about the Air Forces, I saw those little shoes as black baby shoes that were
Mm-hmm.
really soft leather, and and the pearls delicateness, the very clean like rear view mirror, very clean pristine air deodorizer. And I saw just black shoes. I saw fashion, right? But these layers of meaning that come from your lived experience go so far in helping understand how it must feel to try to decode the world.
Yeah.
And it's very unfortunate that for so many centuries, we haven't been able to see really brilliant works by Black artists such as yourself, and we've missed the opportunity to understand the shared experience that we have. It's kept us separate, right?
Mm.
By not allowing us the opportunity to understand on a somatic level more about the world outside of our own little siloed bodies.
Yeah. I think even you mentioning just on the somatic level, I'm always talking about the somatics or Black somatics. And I think I don't even, if I don't even like, if you're not Black, outside of maybe like Black music, I don't even think anyone could fully understand this. I don't think we could understand the somatics of like other people, maybe to like a degree, unless it's like maybe like music. Um, And I think conversations are incredibly important, especially for people who like to put things together to tell stories. Um, and just these like these different types of considerations, because I'm always trying to figure out if I'm showing the work, at least in my brain, the way I see it, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's invited. It just means that the work is here. The work is here, it's present. And I think people understand when they've been invited is because they kind of grasp it almost instantly, even if just kind of like grazing the top, even if they never met me or never heard me talk, there's kind of like an understanding there.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, this is kind of important, and I don't even know how important it is to like fully understand or grasp the complexity of the stories, because they're going to be told regardless. And I think about this when I think about Arthur Jafa talks about muscles that get exercised. Like growing up, my first chapter books was a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket. And I wanted to be Klaus so bad. I wanted to be Violet so bad. And the baby's name was Sunny. I wanted to be all three of these characters. These characters look nothing like me. I also at times wanted to be Count Olaf. And I think about all the books that I used to read where I was never, there was never a character like me in the story. Like not even a main, not even a side character. There just wasn't, until I started reading autobiographies, like real life stories, and then looking for stories where perhaps, right? But I had to strengthen my muscle of just engaging with characters who I felt like on a human level I connected with. Connecting with Klaus's ability to be like, he was an avid reader, and Violet was an inventor, and she could, she would tie her ribbon and she would focus. And I had to do that like my entire life. And on many levels, I'm still doing that, right? Like I was looking for me for so long that I had to become me.
Right.
That's why I'm here, because I was looking for me. And I was
Right.
like, oh my gosh, I can't find myself anywhere. Where is she? I had to become her. I had to
Right.
become, I used to moderate, artist talks at galleries, like, oh, like I want to be her. Or like I'm so serious. But I wanted to see a Black woman like me. And even though there are other contemporaries and peers who are also Black women, they're not me. Like they're not storytelling the way I would like to storytell. They're sharing their own unique stories that I can admire and be encouraged and inspired to tell my own story with the methods and strategies that I have put in place. And yeah, Arthur Jafa talks about how like that muscle, it's constantly, at least for Black people, it's always being exercised, and other people don't necessarily have to exercise it. So I can go into a space, I won't interject, I'll let people tell their story, and I will fully immerse myself. Even if I don't necessarily agree, my curiosity won't allow me to, my curiosity encourages me to lean all the way into whatever anybody else is doing. And so for me, whenever someone finds themselves halting coming into my space, on some level, I'm like, but I just read your story. How come you can't read mine? But then maybe my story isn't for everybody. And then I just began leaning into, maybe your muscle isn't strong enough, and this story isn't for you. Or maybe you're just not invited at all. How about you just like, you can't come at all? So I kind of just play with all of those different levels to see what happens.
Yeah. Wow. Anybody else have any questions? Thank you so much. This is amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah, what a treat to have you here to talk with us and to have your work in the show. Thank you so much for participating and for sharing yourself with us. It's just really an honor.
Thank you so much. I'm actually still so excited to be a part of the group show. I mean, I'm thrilled to be with all of these artists. So this has just been a joy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Tonya. And I look forward to more.
Okay, me too. Okay. Bye. Good night, you
Yes.
guys.